What a great opportunity to talk to some fellow engineers. I'm really looking forward to talking you through RAF Brize Norton and perhaps a little bit about how I found myself in the position that I did. So I am a chartered engineer and I'm a fellow of the IET. So I come from an electrical engineering background and I joined the Royal Air Force in 2000. While studying at university. I'm a graduate of the University of Bath's MEng in Electrical and Electronic Engineering, and I was sponsored through my last couple of years by the Royal Air Force through their cadetship scheme, which set me on my initial pathway to where I am today. I, however, find myself in a hugely unique and privileged position. So I am Station Commander of the Royal Air Force's largest main operating base. However, not only am I the first female to command a main operating base, I'm the first non-air crew, so therefore I'm very proud to be an engineer in that position as well. So sort of a double first for the eng world, if you like, in that sense. And this is quite a new thing, and I'll be able to talk you through some of that this evening, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you have at the end of tonight. So as Station Commander Brize Norton, I find myself charged with preparing for and delivering global air mobility operations. More of that in a moment, but as part of my role, I've also set myself a vision for how I'd like to leave Brize Norton, and that's certainly on a pathway to becoming a next generation air mobility base. We've got some hugely exciting initiatives going on here that I'll talk through as part of this evening's presentation. I'm really looking forward to sharing those with you and seeing perhaps what you think of those, and there may even be some food for thought for those of you who work in MBDA or beyond within your spheres of work, and certainly how we might be collaborating more with industry in this sphere, because there's a huge amount of exciting tech out there, which I'm using my background as an engineer to really drive this place forward with. So I mentioned our mission, and that's all about global air mobility operations. So I'm just going to take myself off camera and play you a video. I'm told the sound is better than the picture. The picture looks great where I'm sitting, so bear with me, and I apologise if it's a little bit jumpy with the buffering. I suspect that's probably my end rather than yours and our bandwidth available within our defence networks, but I will share this afterwards, so for those that are interested can watch it. It's only a couple of minutes long. It's just to give you a flavour of what goes on at Brize Norton and what we do from here. So hopefully that video was good enough to give you a bit of a flavour of our routine operations from here, delivering military equipment, personnel, parachuting, humanitarian relief, you name it, we've pretty much been involved in it in the last few months and continue to be. Brize Norton itself then is the biggest main operating base the Royal Air Force operates. There's over 7,000 personnel work here every single day. Of those, about 5,500 are military, depending on what's going on. Around 1,200 industry partners from most of the well-known defence industry, and about 400 civil servants. So really it's the size of a small town, and it really is what we refer to as the whole force making air happen. It makes it challenging, complex, but hugely effective. It's busy all the time here. And when I say busy all the time, we are a 24/7 airhead. But not only that, I think compared to where else I have served previously, this is the one that really feels 24/7. There are aircraft thundering down the runway here at all times of the day and night. I can attest to that. My house abuts the runway and I am regularly woken up in the wee small hours of the morning as something takes off. I've got some wonderful pictures taken from my bedroom window of our Voyager aircraft rotating, because the rotate point is right outside the window. For the first 6 months, I thought this was the most amazing thing ever. Trust me, after 18 months, that has worn a little thin. The house shakes as they go past, and I get a regular wake-up call at 2 o'clock every Monday morning as one of our scheduled flights takes off. But it's a constant reminder, I think, for our local community here, but it really is, defence is a 24/7 operation, and Brize really is at the heart of that. We are a strategic asset. Our ability to provide air bridges and resupplies across the globe to the military, and indeed in support of UK government, is quite significant. One of the things that's changed here, though, in the last 18 months is we've gone to an airport airline model. So traditionally, for any station, there'd be one station commander, and he, and it always has been a he previously, would run everything. The evolution of our duty holding construct for aviation, so making sure that our aircraft are fit and safe to operate, has meant that the role has become bigger and bigger and bigger, to the extent really now that it had become too big for one person for a start. And also the focus was quite rightly very much on the platforms, but therefore to the detriment of some of the other elements. And having safe to operate platforms is great, but if you don't have a base to operate them from and a safe operating environment in which to conduct your flying, then it's only part of the story. So not only that, it also allows a broader spectrum of people to be considered for the station commander role. So that's quite exciting, because it's opened up the opportunity for people like myself with a non-flying background. And that means as well, just those different perspectives being brought to the fore. Myself and Commander Air Wing, which is what we call the airline element of our operation, with our slightly different backgrounds and our different perspectives, actually make a much stronger team. That two-group captain model, certainly for both of us, has taken away some of the stereotypical military loneliness of command. I've got a peer and a friend with whom I can debate ideas and discuss things with. So in short, I run the airport and he runs the airline. Certainly for Royal Air Force Brize Norton, that's been a hugely successful model. However, the complexity of who lives at Brize certainly means that it's not straightforward, as half the people work for me and half the people work for Simon, who's my colleague in Air Wing. Of the 5,500 military personnel, about 1,600 work directly for me, about 1,600 directly work for him, and other people constitute our lodger unit, so they don't work for either of us, and that would include our industry partners, etc. But as you can see, there's about 2,000 military personnel who don't work for either of us. So we have all sorts of complex arrangements in place, but it works really, really well. And I've tried to maintain here a real Team Brize ethos. And because we're a whole force setup with such a vast array of people, in some ways that becomes quite easy by unifying ourselves behind our mission and our vision. So it seems to be working pretty well. And it's really given the two sides of the house, if you like, a chance to push forward with things that previously without the capacity, there just was not the capacity to do so. So that's been really exciting. And if I just laid out in sort of even greater detail, there are 7 flying squadrons here, 5 reserve squadrons, which is a bigger proportion than any other unit of reserve squadrons and makes up a huge amount of our RAF reserve forces. We have our Joint Air Delivery Tactical Evaluation Unit here. We have 206 as a trial squadron here. We have the Airborne Delivery Wing or Aerial Delivery Wing, which delivers all of Defence's parachute training, from everything from the basic parachute course, so baby parachutists taking their very first steps who haven't even earned their parachute wings yet, all the way through to some really high-end Special Forces capability. Conducting trials alongside that as well. We are home to the Royal Air Force Falcons Parachute Display Team. We are home to No. 1 Air Mobility Wing, which is an essential part of making this an airport of embarkation, handling our passengers, handling our cargo. We also have Tactical Medical Wing here, who are our aeromedical specialists. So again, a really vital part of the services we can provide, both in terms of repatriating personnel to the UK and deployed capability. And then finally, in terms of our big lodger units, we have 47 Aerial Dispatch Squadron, who are a Royal Logistic Corps squadron and are a really essential part of dispatching our stores from the air. If the video was good enough for some of you, you'll have seen some of our stores being dispatched whilst airborne, and that's their key role. So a really, really big and busy old station with a huge array of units who all pull together to deliver what we do here. So it's been a really interesting 18 months for me. I had never served at Brize Norton before. So I had served at, in terms of frontline stations, RAF Kinloss, supporting maritime patrol aircraft, RAF Coningsby supporting Typhoons, and at RAF Leeming as part of a lodger unit myself, where I was the principal engineer on 90 signals unit. Whereas my colleague Simon has got a background in air-to-air refuelling, both as a VC-10 pilot and now as a Voyager pilot. So he spent most of his career at Brize, whereas I spent none of my career at Brize. So you can see the difference we bring there, and it's a really great fusion of somebody who knows Brize and somebody who's come with a fresh set of eyes. And I tend to challenge a lot with asking the question why. But it's been a hugely interesting and successful 18 months so far. So we've got 4 platform types here, and I'm sure many of you will all already know this. So if I just start at the top right with our C-17 aircraft, flown by number 99 Squadron, I always think of the C-17 as a new aircraft, and that's because it was just coming into service as I was just joining the service. But actually now it's been in service since 2001, so it's coming up for its 21st birthday, so it's now deemed an ageing platform. Which probably means that I'm an ageing officer, but there we go. Notwithstanding that, though, the 8 aircraft fleet provides a hugely high level of serviceability, so it really is one of our workhorses. We've got about 280 technicians providing that support. 70 of those work for Boeing, our civilians, so we've got a really blended whole force approach to that. The 24/7 tasking, though, from here really does drive them very, very hard. They work a shift pattern to deliver that. It means that we have to watch out for fatigue. They can be a bit stretched. And it also means that the high utilisation rate of the C-17 in the Royal Air Force means that we're often the fleet leader compared to some of our colleagues in other countries. So we're often the first to experience technical issues. And we're a bit of a pathfinder, which is a great privilege, but often means that we're the ones scratching our heads and figuring things out. But we do work as part of a virtual fleet, so that's 279 aircraft with our allies, such as the USAF and the Australian Air Force, and that working relationship is really, really good. So a workhorse and a hugely reliable one. Moving down to the bottom left, the venerable C-130 aircraft, aging definitely. Sadly for us, for some anyway, it's in its last year of service, going out of service next year. As we start to draw down, that's definitely going to provide us with some engineering challenges, in particular maintenance of the SQEP of our engineers. making sure that we can keep that going. The tasking on that fleet will remain throughout the next year. So balancing that as personnel start to get moved on in the normal cycle of military posting is going to give us a challenge. We are managing it very, very closely. And I think the maturity of the platform and the squadron, it's operated by 47 Squadron, is a real advantage. And we're working very closely with industry, with defence equipment and support, and just internally within the air mobility force to make sure that we can deliver what we need to over the sort of remaining 11, 12 months of its service. Top left, A400M. It is the new boy on the block. It's still building experience, and certainly it's not as reliable as we anticipated. As ever with a new platform, there's all sorts of things to iron out. We're definitely getting there. We've learnt a lot about spares provisioning, and we continue to work through that, but we're doing an awful lot of cannibalisation at the moment to maximise the utility of the assets. So very much we're still learning and making sure that we can assimilate the key roles that the C-130 currently undertakes before its out of service date is a big focus for us at the moment. And also for the available fleet, we've got a lot of modifications that need to be put onto the platforms, and with the sort of multi-nation construct as well, taking that into consideration as we do those modifications is all part and parcel of managing a platform such as this. So it's not only supporting 24/7 operations from Brize Norton in a similar way to the C-17, but it's also supporting detachments around the globe. So it's already really, really busy, which is quite exciting, but it means we've got to balance the busyness of the current tasking with making sure that we develop its capability. And then finally, the Voyager. It is an Airbus A330 in terms of what it is and looks like, but we use it as well as for passengers and freight for air-to-air refuelling. Uniquely within the Royal Air Force, it's serviced and maintained by licensed technicians. So it's a mixed civilian military workforce, and the nature of the contract that we've got in place means it's also subject to CAA oversight. So that's quite unique. It works very well. The serviceability rate is excellent, and really we're carrying very few deferred faults on those platforms. So it's a very successful model. We've got 14 aircraft. 9 of those are required to be available for tasking with the Royal Air Force at any one time, with the remaining being either in maintenance or chartered out for civilian purposes. So we've got sort of really 4 different platforms, but 4 different models. They can feel like totally separate entities, but we are all one big force, and we work together to deliver the output. And it makes our airfield incredibly busy with around sort of 60 aircraft at any one time. I've mentioned though that it's not just about the platforms. On the top left there, 2 Squadron Royal Air Force Regiment. So number 4 Force Protection Wing also lives at Brize Norton, and 2 Squadron RAF Regiment are our regiment parachute specialists, so makes absolute sense that they were moved to Brize Norton about 3 years ago. And what we're now doing is working with them on our exercises. The top left photograph there is from exercise Tartan Spirit, which takes place in Scotland twice a year. It is a 24 Squadron, which is our operational conversion unit exercise, traditionally a C-130 exercise used to train crews. What we've started to do is expand that, so it's not just C-130s. And for the last iteration, we took 2 Squadron with us, we took our tactical air traffic controllers with us, and we also took huge amounts of fire specialists, movers, and actually deployed them. So what we're starting to do now is integrate all of the elements that live and work at Brize in a way that allows us all to get training benefits, and therefore to develop our full air mobility capability together. I popped up to see that exercise. Really, really good to go and understand how we might fit it all together in a bear-based scenario. And I know 2 Squadron got a lot from being part of that exercise, and it's great to have them located at Brize where we can work with them to develop that sort of capability. Bottom left, there's some very shiny looking ambulances there, symbolising our Aeromed capability. You'd be surprised how often the guys and girls on TACMed Wing are used, not just deployed, but in terms of returning personnel who need medical care as part of that and certainly hugely active during COVID, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And then on the right there is a chalk of paratroopers going up to do some parachute jumping from one of our air platforms, and delivered and coordinated by ADW, as I've previously mentioned. So Brize is just this big family of force elements who are all contributing to delivering air mobility operations. And that's before we then look at the station enablers, so air traffic control, our military transport section, our station operations, logistics, human resources support, infrastructure support, all the things that go into making this base tick. And hopefully that's giving you a real flavour of just quite how big and busy Brize is, and quite how much it takes to make the air mobility force work, as opposed to just Brize being an airhead from which it operates. Something this size, though, does not come without its challenges, sadly. I think the biggest two that I've faced in my tenure are firstly infrastructure, and secondly operating within a pandemic context. So taking infrastructure first of all, Brize was built in 1937, and it is big, and maintaining it takes a lot of effort. Some of our buildings are quite old, and it feels like a constant battle sometimes, and whilst we have very good plans in place to modernise and mature things, that doesn't happen overnight. So we have a rolling programme to modernise our air base, and I'll come back to some of the exciting things a little later on. But things like our runway is a really critical asset, so making sure that that is up to scratch becomes really important. Our technical accommodation to ensure that our output is delivered, really, really important. And because we are a town, we also have lots of living accommodation for our personnel, so making sure that that's fit for purpose. And we have some quite old accommodation here for our personnel, as well as some brand new accommodation, so making sure there's a rolling programme of infrastructure works to bring all of the accommodation up to really modern standards. And we are a good portion into that. There's still a lot more to do, and there'll be more to do after I leave. And the winter months always gives a bit more of a challenge, keeping our runway ice free. We have a high water table here. So these are all things that day to day, my team and I are considering to make sure that the airfield is open, functional, that our people have a good place to live and work. And there are areas of the station that are very modern, and there are areas, like I've mentioned, that just the age of them gives us a little bit of a challenge at times. But we've got a great team around here who make sure that that all happens, so that no matter what, we are able to operate 24/7. The second challenge I mentioned is operating in a pandemic context. So Brize Norton is absolutely not immune to COVID-19. I wish that it was. We've learnt a huge amount, and like everybody else, we have had periods of isolation. We've been affected by lockdown rules. The big challenge for somewhere like Brize, though, is twofold. Firstly, the nature of what we do means we have to continue to operate. And certainly, for example, our aircraft engineers, our firemen, they are not things that can be delivered remotely. So as well as being an essential workforce, for many of our personnel, the option to work remotely was simply not there. Delivering 24/7, so having to introduce shift bubbles, really quite a challenge. How do you narrow down your engineering shift handover to do minimum exposure so you don't cross-contaminate between shifts, so that we absolutely protect our ability to deliver those shifts? Really a bit of a headache. So yes, I don't want my people to be sick, but the knock-on impact for Brize Norton losing an engineering shift and not being able to deliver its output, for losing a fire shift and not being able to provide fire cover, and then even bigger still for us has been the need to protect our aircrew so that we can actually deliver the tasks that we need to. Not being able to do so could be argued would be a strategic failure. So it's been a double consideration for us. We had to have people in work. How do you protect them? People also socialise here, so how do you socialise? How do you police the socialising so that it is COVID compliant? And then moving forward, whilst many areas now have taken away a lot of their COVID restrictions, we've actually had to maintain quite a lot of them to ensure that we can protect that output because the isolation requirements, if you test positive, are still there, etc. So whilst we absolutely seem to all be moving in the right direction in this pandemic, it remains a constant source of consideration for me as the responsible person on the unit, not just from a health of our personnel, but really driven by our operational output. It has been possible. Equally in context, just to give you a sense of the scale of Brize looking after itself, at our height, we were providing for 900 people in isolation on this camp. And as you can imagine, the welfare of those people, many of whom are living in a single person room, is quite high on our agenda. So it's not just about providing meals on wheels, it's also about having welfare support in place. We had virtual quizzes, we had virtual gym circuits running, and we did everything we could to support those people. So perhaps one of the nice benefits of being a massive whole force military community was our ability to provide that support, as well as using some of our welfare houses as isolation centres. We've also had to deal with passengers finding out they're COVID positive whilst airborne, and dealing with those scenarios, particularly because they could be inbound to Brize Norton, but they also might be outbound to somewhere else. So we've often had to receive people off aircraft and put them straight into isolation. So we've got a fairly robust system, as you would expect now. We do have testing facilities on camp, and we've learnt a huge amount about how to operate in this sort of scenario. And in some ways, we've very much normalised it now. So most of our personnel absolutely understand why we're doing what we're doing. Communicating to them has been a principal part of that. And actually, it's become largely self-policing. And certainly in recent months, we don't just reflect the downwards trend of society, given the proximity in which we often have to work together. And the size of this base, our case rates have been really low, and that is because our personnel have absolutely understood what's required of them and delivered it. So that's been absolutely amazing. No presentation on Brize Norton in the last 6 months would be complete without me mentioning Operation Pitting. That being our 3-week high tempo operation to evacuate eligible people from Afghanistan. So this is possibly the best thing I have been part of in my career. Why? Because the unifying sense of purpose that this mission had is like nothing else I have ever seen, both deployed and at RAF Brize Norton. So it was the biggest airlift operation since the Berlin airlift, so that's over 70 years ago. We absolutely had a plan in place ahead of time. Our plan was to evacuate over about 5 weeks, about 5,000 people. We have a saying that no plan survives contact with the enemy, and this was a case in point. We ended up evacuating 15,000 people in under 3 weeks, and goodness me, what an effort. 19 aircraft deployed from Brize Norton across all 4 of our fleets. The high tempo was only sustained because of our engineers. Yes, there's a whole force thing here, but why do I emphasise that point? We did not lose a single sortie in those 3 weeks to aircraft serviceability. I think that is a phenomenal achievement. I'm sure there'll be those asking, well, if you can do that when it matters, why can't you do it all the time? But it just shows how hard those engineers worked to make this happen. We operated a hub and spoke operation, which meant we were taking passengers out of Kabul into the Middle East and then onwards to the UK. Many of those flights came into RAF Brize Norton. The flying conditions for the team down route, hugely challenging. The moment the Taliban seized Kabul and the airport, as you can imagine, most of the civilian airport staff fled. Indeed, any of the Afghan military staff also fled. Absolutely understandable. Absolute chaos. But the so what from that is it effectively turned Kabul International Airport into a tactical landing strip in Kabul. The rate of traffic going in was incredibly high. You'll all have seen the pictures on the news of the security situation on the ground and the absolutely phenomenal job that the Parachute Regiment and our RAF Regiment gunners did in patrolling with our allies the airport perimeter, providing the security, providing the control of entry, absolutely would not have been possible without them. But it meant that the airspace was quite chaotic and therefore really quite dangerous to fly in. And there's some real stories of impressive airmanship have emerged from there. In terms of a C-17 that really was pretty close to hitting a bus that had strayed onto the runway as it commenced its takeoff roll. The decision was taken to continue. It was absolutely the right one, but very, very close to one hitting the bus and two stalling the aircraft. So really some hair-raising flying took place in order to evacuate those that needed to be evacuated. Again, having seen on the news those really desperate humanitarian situation around the airport for those 3 weeks, there were people who had been standing in an open sewer for several days before they'd been admitted into the airfield to be boarded onto a flight. And these were people who had fled with the clothes they stood up in often, and we were transporting them on tactical aircraft, so you'll have seen that they sat on the floor, hugely grateful to be evacuated, but terrified as well. We had one lady who had very sadly lost her husband in the bomb that went off outside the airport a couple of days prior to her being admitted. She'd survived with her children. And I don't wish to be too crude, but as the aircraft doors closed and she got airborne, she lost control of all of her bodily functions, just showing just how much stress and terror she had been under for those last few days. We had women who were too tired to hold their babies, and the crew often took control with a little bit of persuasion just to allow these exhausted parents to have a bit of rest before they undertook the next part of their journey. Once they'd arrived in the Middle East, they were then transferred from our tactical aircraft onto our Voyager aircraft, so much more like a civilian airliner. But these people again have brought with them often nothing other than a passport and a phone and the clothes they stood up in. We were not given very much notice of the first flight arriving into Brize Norton with these personnel, and we were presented here with scenes of real humanitarian need. People who haven't slept in days, they've been living in open sewers for days, they haven't had any chance to wash, they have no change of clothes, they're hungry. They've provided what they can on the aircraft, but a combination of COVID and expediency meant there was often no food on the aircraft. Being prepared to deal with that was quite hard for the team. They're absolutely used to dealing with passengers, to dealing with freight, to dealing with no notice operational tasks, and we absolutely have had flights in from Wuhan at the start of the pandemic, but dealing with people in this amount of humanitarian need was really quite shocking. And you'll see here there are pictures at the bottom there of our team greeting some of the children that came off those flights. The lasting memory for me is just how children the world over are the same. The very last evacuation flight we took from Kabul, the last family had just gone into our reception centre, and many of the children and adults, because they only bought what they stood up in, had travelled in their sort of party best, if you like. So this abiding memory I have is of a tiny little girl, maybe 18 months, perhaps 2 years old, who's in her best party dress, and she's just been handed a cuddly toy, as you see in the bottom right there, and she's squealing with delight at this toy. Now, bearing in mind it's 2 o'clock in the morning and her mother and grandmother are sitting down and they are exhausted, and she's running around squealing with delight, handing the toy to her grandmother, taking it back, giving it to her mother. And it was a really humbling experience, just how this small child is the joy of a toy in a safe environment, the exhaustion of the parents who feel that they're safe. So in order to provide all of that here, we worked with the Red Cross, the Border Force, the local police, to make sure that we could receive these people. We tried to say welcome rather than hello. Utterly exhausted, really pleased to be safe. Many of my team were hugged, particularly by the elderly ladies, who were just incredibly grateful, making sure we had baby formulas, nappies, and certainly by the end of the 3 weeks, we've matured our operation with our partners to provide prams, changes of clothes, you name it, we were able to deliver it. Thanks also to the local community here, who were only too pleased to be able to help. Our call for donations, particularly for provision for young children, was met with an overwhelming response, to the extent that we were actually able to donate extras back into the local community. But I think that huge sense of wanting to help, we were not short of volunteers either to deploy or to help back here. The flights all arrived at early hours of the morning. We had many of our volunteers would happily work all day, and then absolutely then work all night to deliver this. And the real sense of purpose that they had for doing this, many of them have said it's the best thing they've ever done in their career. And I still, 6 months later or 5 months later, swell with pride every time I think about what happened during just 3 weeks. We had a very, very tired force at the end of that. But do you know what? Goodness me, what a job well done by the team. And I think what I've got now, so just some facts and figures on that. I mentioned 15,000 personnel evacuated, 166 sorties flown, about 70 of those then came back into Brize Norton, 19 aircraft, and our record-breaking C-17 flight, which took 436 passengers. That is more than double we would normally take on a C-17 aircraft. Not as many as one of the US flights ended up taking, but they got very much overwhelmed, whereas ours was a very much a deliberate ploy to take that many people. And then setting up the reception centre back here at Brize, which had never been done before. And we've now made a standing thing at Brize Norton with our ability to react at short notice to those flights as and when they're required from anywhere in the world. So this next video I've got is just a collection of clips of our efforts in Operation Pitting. It'll sound very noisy, that's deliberate. The narrator filmed it on the aircraft pan at Kabul International Airport. The sound is definitely more important than the video quality here, so I hope that you enjoy this and it brings to life what I've just talked about.
The Air Mobility Force conducted a non-combat evacuation from Kabul, Afghanistan, of UK entitled personnel and Afghani people. This has involved force elements from across the Air Mobility Force and contributions from all its personnel. I have been very fortunate to lead the detachment from Air Commodore and Manning Force. I am very proud of what the detachment has done, and I'd like to thank all the deployed air crews, the deployed engineers and the whole force based at home in the UK. You have all played a part in our success and the endeavours that have led to the point now where we're evacuating the last of our combat troops. When we look back, we should all be proud of what we have done, and we can say that we did our best.
So just before I move on to sort of the next generation element, it's worth mentioning with that of course the operation didn't stop once we'd got all of those needing to be evacuated out. We had to bring our own teams home as well. So the exhaustion of those who'd been out on the ground, we knew they were coming back to Brize, and we wanted to make sure that we made this as easy as we could for them. So rather than this just being like a normal airport arrivals procedure for them, we had their transport available for them as close to the aircraft as we could. We had mountains of food available for them. We opened up all of our ablution facilities to them. The padres were on hand. We had packed lunches made for them, and I think at one stage we were doing several hundred packed lunches a day, just coming through the system. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're doing it every day for 3-4 weeks, and we did everything we could to just make that return as painless as possible. And goodness me, particularly the paras and the RAF regiment were absolutely visibly exhausted, had run out of clean clothing, they just came back in whatever state they were. It was quite a pongy terminal, that is for sure. But that working together as a team, looking after our own, and that included our colleagues in the parachute regiment, really was part and parcel of that. And that real sense of teamwork. It was the paras and us, the Royal Air Force, doing our thing. Just again, incredibly gratifying. Also worth mentioning that throughout that period, none of our other operations stopped. So we were still doing our routine flights down to the Falklands, out to Cyprus, a lot of call on us to support broader COVID efforts. So we did a lot of vaccine distribution to UK overseas territories, providing aeromedical evacuation for COVID to remote parts of the UK, and plenty of our staff deployed in support of the NHS. So it wasn't just pitting, we had an awful lot going on at the time, which I think just made it one more satisfying. But we certainly needed some downtime at the end of that. But I hope you all agree that what I've just showed you, we're all hugely proud of what we achieved here in the circumstances that we were presented with, and really does go to show the utility of that Air Mobility Force's agility and ability to deliver broader government intent wherever it happens to be in the globe. However, Brize can't just stand still. So what about tomorrow? And that's what the next generation air mobility base concept is all about. That's why the vision is as it is. It's all about driving forward Brize Norton for tomorrow. So we're running a 5-pillar strategy here. Platform optimization kind of speaks for itself. It is very much led by Commander Air Wing. And on the left there, you've got the Reformation Parade for 30 Squadron, which took place at the end of last year, us growing our A400M capability. And this was a hugely important step. It was a great honour to have Her Royal Highness here. She is the Honorary Air Commodore for RAF Brize Norton. So really important to us that she was here to oversee that Reformation Parade, a really important step. Digitisation, understandably close to my heart as a communications electronics engineer and soon to be cyberspace professional, as the Air Force adopts to the changing space there. We have got, goodness me, some really exciting projects going on. So we are in partnership with BT, and next month with that partnership we will run an 18-month-long 5G trial at RAF Brize Norton. That is already giving me opportunity to revolutionise how we run this base. And there are almost more opportunities than I could hope for, and plenty more that I haven't thought of yet. And this concept of understanding what I don't know yet to drive things forward, but revolutions in terms of our force protection, security of how we might do things, running the airfield, safety, they're almost too numerous to mention, and they start to give ideas to some of the other elements on the digitisation front. And what we're finding is that it's like ink spots, cultivating the good ideas at the lowest level, and they start to join together and feed off each other. A really good example of that would be our new Technology and Innovation Centre. I realise lots of businesses now have these sorts of concepts. Ours, though, grew out of 2 of our very junior personnel who had a good idea. These 2 were, still are, safety equipment fitters by trade. and they realised that an awful lot of time and effort was wasted by aircrew having to deploy into the field to learn to use their emergency radios. Not only that, the servicing burden it caused on limited assets and the extra engineering, etc., required on those really was quite inefficient. And their idea was to use virtual and augmented reality to do this in a different way that meant far more flexibility for aircrew to train, far less servicing required because less call to get your hands on the assets, and an opportunity to train in a much more cost-effective way as well. So less time away, less engineering burden, and far less cost as well. They bid for some money through our Astra scheme, got some money, then realised they had an idea and some money and didn't really know how to do it. So they've taught themselves to code. Not only that, they've now delivered a system that is delivering that training. It's been adopted by our our escape and evasion school, and it is proving hugely successful. It's also evolved and grown arms and legs. We've just taken delivery of some Tesla haptic suits. So these are suits that when you put them on, make it feel like it's raining, it's windy, it's hot, and you're in the desert. And they tell me that they can do all sorts of things like simulate you being shot and all sorts of things. I'm not sure I quite want to go that far, but that opportunity to make this very real has just provided us with an opportunity to get rid of death by PowerPoint, really test that people understand how to use this kit. This is life-saving kit. Falling asleep in a lecture and sort of doing a tick box exercise is not the same as the instructors being able to teach you in real time and then checking that you've really understood it and are comfortable with the equipment, but also no pressure. If you need lots of time on the equipment, you can do it out of hours. So that was sort of step one. What became really apparent though with that is I think that these two safety equipment fitters are probably wasted doing the more traditional work of making sure all the safety equipment is serviceable. There's also huge amounts of opportunity here, and people were already starting to ask questions because the mapping capability they were delivering was such that the opportunity was just too good to be true. So we have taken them out of their core day job and taken some risk there in order to set them up running as two junior ranks, our technology and information centre, and we've deliberately not put layers of command structure on top of them. They have today just given me an update on where they are with it, and they put the RAF Regiment Gunner, who is doing these escape and evasion training, in front of me, and I said, what do you think? He's over the moon with what he's got. Two medics who've asked them for some help, and if today was day one for them, within 2 hours they've already got a working model for delivering servicing on the equipment that they need. So they no longer need to touch the deployable kit, which not only does it need to be kept ready to deploy, may well be deployed. So our ability to train as we fight, enhanced. Our ability to allow people to train at a time and place that suits them, enhanced. Working with our Voyager force as well to deliver simulation and mapping software for them. So rather than being in a hugely expensive aircraft simulator, which they absolutely still need, opportunity to train in a much more effective, flexible way. So hugely exciting. It's also allowed us to develop our concept to tackle the challenge of this space to innovate. Lots of people have got ideas, but the challenge was, goodness me, I haven't got time to do it. So I've pinched Google's idea, quite frankly, which is pitch me your idea about the innovation. If I like it, you've now got three options. You do it in your spare time. You do it part-time in the Tech Innovation Centre, released from work with support from the experts around the station, or we let you sprint at it for a set period of time. So that's proving quite popular. It's in its infancy, but we're getting there. So that's all grown from those two individuals. The final part of this is data. We want to be data-driven. So we had an on-time performance cell that looked at how do we get our aircraft off chocks. That data has driven a how do we make that more efficient project. We reckon that we can eliminate 90% of some of our inefficiency and duplication just by using digital tools that are already available to us. And we've also generated 2 years worth of data. We now need to do this properly. So I'm in the process of standing up our first data domain team. So this is hugely exciting because if I start to loop this back now, the data domain team is going to help me drive some of the assets that are going to be available to me with my 5G trial are going to enable me to use some fairly shallow AI to deliver real-time data to enable data-driven decisions at RAF Brize Norton. Some of the technology that's going to come as part of our 5G trial, LiDAR. If I've got LiDAR, I can link that into my virtual reality space and the ideas the team have got there. So I'm just hugely excited by this, as you can probably tell. Really, really exciting. Sustainability. The RAF wants to be net zero by 2040. Two really impressive things that have come out of that so far. We've done our first sets of synthetic aviation fuel trials on a VVIP sortie recently. There's lots more to do in terms of infrastructure and supply, but all of our platforms have engines that are certified to take synthetic blends. So we're on our way. Lots more to do, but those first visible steps have been taken. And the second really impressive thing that's been totally generated by really junior people again is a bioprocessing capability that takes some of the nasty waste from our aircraft, so particularly things like hydraulic fluids, oil, and through a method of bioprocessing delivers water and an organic sludge. The organic sludge is used to feed plants which are taking away some of the CO2 that comes as part of this process. Two junior ranks again have come up with this idea. RAF 100 engineering competition winners with that idea, has had several £1 million worth of investment, and we're now about to be at the pilot projects stage with that. So hugely exciting. Everyone matters. This is all about our people. It's all about a workplace that is welcoming. You would expect us to be like that, wouldn't you? Of course, we should all be like that, but having that focus on it is really driving us forward. And the final one is pride, and by that I mean I'm proud to work at Brize. I'm proud to be part of the Air Mobility Force. So this has really generated an element of self-help. So people really taking responsibility for their work area, for their own accommodation block, and now also moving into do the basics right. So a real focus on we're all busy. Let's make sure we start with the basics, and that feeds into then all the other strands that we've got, so air safety in particular, by doing the basics right. You can see from those 5 pillars that's really driven an innovation strand at Brize. We are leaping ahead. We've got plenty of investment. We've got lots of our industry partners wanting to work with us. Really exciting stuff. I've already mentioned A400M growth as we move in particular towards that C130 retirement date. And the final part of our next generation airbase is our infrastructure. So I mentioned that it can give me a bit of a headache, and there are the very modern to the 1937 available at Brize. So the EMP is our estates management plan. And what that work has given me is a town plan. So for the first time, we've got a proper development plan that looks at the whole base in a really sequential, logical manner. I know exactly what I need to do when, what I have to do first before I can do the next thing. And we are on our way to starting to deliver that now. That's about a 10+ year plan, but having that plan in place, really exciting. I will just highlight one last thing on the slide. The bottom photograph there is the autonomous vehicle trial we ran last year. First steps again, but that is an autonomous vehicle on our aircraft pan. I'm a big believer in forcing ourselves to do this. So rather than sucking my teeth and saying no way, it's what has to be true to make this happen. And by taking that approach, we were able to have an autonomous vehicle on our aircraft pan, working with the Academy of Robotics, really exciting, young, fresh company, and hopefully just the first stage. So that's a relatively quick canter through Brize Norton, what we've been up to, what we are and where we're going. And I thought I'd just finish with a couple of minutes on me as an engineer, and how did I find myself in this hugely amazing position. That's me on the right. The other 3 photos are of my mother. And the real point here is I stand on the shoulders of giants. Albeit my mother is only 5'1", but the point being there are trailblazers before each and every one of us. The myth of the sole inventor. She joined the Royal Air Force as an engineering officer in the early 1970s. She too has an electrical engineering degree, but was very much avionics focused. worked on the Vulcan, worked on the Harrier GR1, did an exchange tour with the Royal Signals. A very different world to the one that I joined in terms of the Royal Air Force. But actually the Royal Air Force has always been right at that forefront of equality, diversity, pushing the boundaries. My mother's got some real horror stories. Her degree is from Imperial College. She was offered jobs as a secretary with very well-known engineering firms on the premise that if she didn't get married and have children in 10 years' time, they'd consider employing her as a graduate engineer. Others who most shockingly said if she had a hysterectomy age 21, they would consider employing her as an engineer. The Royal Air Force, on the other hand, offered her the opportunity to be an engineer officer, to do the same job as her male colleagues. And whilst it wasn't totally equal, she wasn't allowed on the front line. She had to leave when she got pregnant with me. The Air Force was at the forefront of being that equal opportunities employer. And she had a brilliant time in the Royal Air Force. She is in her mid-70s now. She's retired twice, but the bottom line is she's still working as an engineer. Why? Because she loves it. And I think for me, in terms of becoming an engineer, that normalisation, it didn't even occur to me it wasn't something that girls did, because my mum did it. My mum had a job, my dad had a job. My dad was also in the Royal Air Force, but as a pilot. And that normalisation, so definitely that real normalisation, girls in STEM. Yeah, I was always a girl in STEM because my mum was already a girl in STEM. And I think as a youngster, the really important point to me, I look back now as a 40-odd-year-old going, oh my goodness me, wow, what a trailblazer. But when I was a kid, she's just my mum. And that normalisation, she didn't need to wear a cape. She was my mum. This was normal. I could do it too. I think for me, the opportunity the Royal Air Force has given me, not only as an engineer, so the ability to support all of those platforms from a communications perspective that I've had the privilege of doing, but also that opportunity to step beyond being an engineer. So my previous job to this one, I was the military assistant to the Vice Chief of Defence Staff. Prior to that, I was Group Captain Air Resources and Plans, so understanding how the money worked for the Air Force, have enabled me to grow from being an engineer into somebody who's able to step into these more senior management roles. What I would offer is that as an engineer, I've actually felt incredibly well equipped to take on these roles. Engineers tend to be quite good with numbers and logic, so that meant Air Resources and Plans was a bit of a breeze in that sense. Being comfortable in that digital space meant that in the Vice Chief's office, I was able to add value to both of the Vice Chiefs that I worked for. It wasn't something they had done, whilst in return I absolutely got the international and strategic military and cross-government broadening. And I think serving at so many airfields during my early career, and not just one, and also being a communications electronics specialist, where I've done an awful lot of cyber and digital, but also a lot of communications infrastructure work, has really put me in a great place to do the job I'm now doing. Running big flights of airmen and airwomen as a very junior officer has meant that a lot of the personnel and HR issues that I'm faced with as a base commander, they're just on a bigger scale. And actually being an engineer has put me in that position of having touched many of the things that as a base commander you're required to do. And I think that that natural problem solving, engineer's logical approach to most things has also been really advantageous in this role. And then I think finally the Royal Air Force opening up the opportunities beyond the traditional cadres has led me to where I am today. So I think being an engineer has been a great pathway to be on. Having great role models has enabled me to get on where I am. And I think as part of that, I was part of the University Air Squadron as a student, which meant I did a little bit of flying. I'm not aircrew, but I was lucky enough to do 100-odd hours of flying in a Bulldog in my early years, tentative steps into the Royal Air Force itself. So I've felt that the Air Force and the engineering and the role modelling has given me a really rounded journey to get to where I am today. But I love showing this photo of my mother because I'm hugely proud of her. And she really has been the trailblazer, or one of the trailblazers, has opened the doors for people like me into normalising a STEM career for women. And she's also living proof that why do you have to retire at 65? If you don't want to, don't. Just do it on your terms. And she is still somebody whose expertise is sought in engineering consultancy, particularly for control systems. And that is growing from being an officer in the Royal Air Force, a 7-year career break while she had a family, and then going back to work and almost starting again. So it can be done. She's living proof you can have it all, perhaps just not all at once. And that, you know what, don't live to those norms, live with what you want to do. And if STEM is what you want to do, absolutely do it. So I think that is more than enough from me. I will hand back over to you, and I'm more than happy to take any questions. Thanks very much for your time this evening.
Rebecca, perfect. Thank you very much. Absolutely incredible chat. No, really, really interesting. Thank you, and good to get an insight into operations, into current operations and the plans for the future. But then, you know, to see how you almost has got to where you are, that adds a really human element, and I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. So indeed, I will open the floor for some questions, acknowledging the time. I don't want to take up too much of your evening. If anybody has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat, and we can go for that. I saw somebody had their hand up earlier, so we can maybe find them. I think my question for you, Emily, would be, you mentioned how important it is to have to have those role models out there, and how that, you know, you naturally had that, and it was never a conscious thought for you. Can you see a way, we'll call it for the RAF especially, to really get the message out there to young people across the country? Can you see any particular channels, or is it just a holistic approach?
So I think we, like many big STEM employers, are absolutely keen to make sure that STEM is available to all, and everybody is encouraged to be part of this STEM journey. And we very much have engineering competitions, STEM outreach programs. At Brize Norton, for example, we are running summer camps, various, some of them are sporty. We're running a STEM camp. The Royal Air Force also supports women in STEM. So while I was at Leeming, we ran a week for women in STEM for students who were just about to choose their GCSE subjects. And I think what I hadn't appreciated is we all have different backgrounds, and that is normal to us. But for some of these young women, if it hadn't been women only, their families would not have allowed them to attend. We had one or two who the mother and the school had worked together to get the child to be able to attend. But if the father had found out, would have been very upset, but at least would have been appeased by the fact that it was all female. And I think the other thing with some of these all female settings has also been to allow these girls to be in charge, it's okay to be good at STEM. If that's your thing, but actually the fact that STEM is in everything we do. I'm not a believer in the fact that I used to be, because it used to be good for sort of winding people up and having a bit of fun, but STEM and science are not mutually exclusive. You need both. You need science needs to be in art, and art needs to be in science. You know, they are not mutually exclusive, and there's a place in STEM for everybody. It's all around us. STEM is absolutely there, and in particular digital skill sets. And I think my story about our safety equipment fitters here is key to that. Digital skills, everybody needs them, no matter what it is they think they want to do. So it becomes increasingly important, and therefore for all of us who work in big organisations, having these STEM initiatives hugely important in making them available, but also joining the dots between them. So we also work with the John Egging Trust, which was set up to help slightly disadvantaged children, or children perhaps who were on slightly the wrong path, linking that in with STEM. It's not all about STEM, but why not make STEM part of that, link it with the other initiatives. Using cadet organisations, a really obvious one, but there will be others out there. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to give something back in that sense, to be part of that, and also making it normal. The camps that I've been part of for young females in particular, I often get my mum to come and speak. Very easy to say, yeah, but she's in her 70s. How is that relatable? Trust me, Her story is absolutely relatable, and her journey is one that often the girls will say afterwards was the best part of the week. Be normal, just be a mum. You know, if she can do it, I can do it. So creating those role models, and I often say to parents as well, you know, don't underestimate your role. So offering to be out there, just making sure the opportunity's there and spreading the word. Be the ink spot again.
Interesting insight. Thank you. And it's interesting that you mentioned the need to tie in the arts to the sciences. We have this problem, I say problem, in the Aeronautical Society, because a lot of people look at us and they say, "Oh, the Aeronautical Society, that must be for, you know, air crew, engineers, or pilots." You go, well, no, it's so much more than that. And I think you're exactly right that it's such a wide field. And as your career attests, you can, you know, develop your skills into different areas. I imagine when you started your career, you didn't see this role sort of on the horizon. So no, interesting. Thank you. We have a good question in chat. Don has asked an RAF question. What preparations are underway at the moment to support potential future developments in Ukraine? If you can answer that.
I'm having a bit of a chuckle for that very reason. So what I can say is, as you would expect, we remain ready to deploy wherever we're required, and we certainly have the agility to do that. We're always monitoring world events, and that's probably, you know, enough.
Fair, yeah, makes sense to me. I think a Teams call perhaps not the right forum for that one at that depth. So yeah, a good question though. But yeah, perfect. I mean, I certainly don't have any more questions. I could ask questions on this all evening. It's a topic I'm very passionate about. But acknowledging it is past. I think I would like to express our gratitude. Oh no, there you are. Good question. From Mike N. Knowing how long the runway at Brize is, I've overflown it. It's quite a length. What happens when it needs resurfacing?
Yeah, so we have a rolling programme of infrastructure works, as I mentioned, and the runway is no different. So we are due in 2025 to have our runway resurfaced. So what we do is we work around our operations. So at the moment, we've got lots of options of how we might do that, and we'll therefore have a plan in place as and when that comes. So runways can last sort of 10 to 20 years. Before they need full resurfacing, and we're sort of at that point. So as you can see, you know, it's only just into 2022, and we're already working up our options to understand what each of those means and how we might work that around our ongoing need to deliver operations, because that certainly won't stop.
Perfect. Yeah, interesting. Perfect. Right. In that case, I certainly don't have anything else. Emily, thank you very, very much for your time. It has been a fantastic lecture and a really, really good one to finish up this short season on. I appreciate you taking time for this, and I appreciate everyone attending for their interaction and their interest.